If any of you have come here tonight expecting something better than we heard this morning, you are going to be disappointed. And I say that because today Sean presented powerfully a powerful message. I am so thankful for his willingness to take on a difficult topic, but to deal with it biblically and with great care. And so I'm thankful for that. I'm sorry that this is what you're going to get for tonight, unless you're willing to accept the singing that we just heard as a replacement. It was great. Tucker, 5 more songs if you would, please, and we'll be done. No, that's sick him to a dog for a song leader, right? No, I am thankful for Tucker and those who lead us in our worship, and of course for all of you as we encourage one another in song. For tonight, if I could, let me set the stage. A man by the name of Olanza Kiana, a country squire no longer young. He, being retired, has much time for books, and he reads them throughout the day and into the night, and many times throughout the night. And everything that he reads oppresses him about man's murderous ways towards man. And so he broods, and he broods, and he broods. And from so much brooding, his brains, well, they dry up. And so he takes on the most interesting of projects, and that is to release himself from the melancholy burden of sanity and to no longer be simply Olanza Kiana, but now to be a dauntless knight named Don Quixote who will go out throughout the Spanish countryside righting all wrongs. So is the opening monologue to my most favorite Broadway musical, 1965's The Man of La Mancha. For those of you who are not familiar with it, you probably are familiar with the most notable centerpiece in the entire musical score, and that is a song called The Impossible Dream, which has been manifested and interpreted in a number of ways. But for those of you who don't know much about the plot, you need to understand that this man, Alonso Quijana, takes on this appearance as Don Quixote. He brings along with him his squire, a man by the name of Sancho Panza, and they head off into the Spanish countryside, and they encounter a wayside inn. Wayside not just because of its location, because it is a place where hardened men reside, where those who come in are traders and those who are the least favorite of society. And as he approaches the inn, he sees a woman. Her name is El Donza, a translation of her Spanish word that just simply means she's a housemaiden. But this is not just a housemaiden, she's a housemaiden of some ill repute. And as he sees her, she basically says, "What do you want?" And he is put out by the question, not because she has no right to ask him, but he sees her for something different than what might be at first glance. In fact, he calls her Dulcinea. He said she is the one to whom he wishes to serve, not to be served. That he might dedicate all of his victories, that she is the most chaste of all women. She chuckles at even the notion, much less the words. It is that in this story we begin to see that Don Quixote sees a world not for the way that it is, but the way that it should be. To see beyond the outward appearance and the momentary afflictions of life, and to say there is something beyond all of this, and that is at the heart of this story. But it serves as a great introduction as we consider something that all of us down deep inside and those who are beyond this room feel, and that is the need to be seen. We post our pictures, "Do you see me?" We make our comments, "Do you hear me?" We overwork, we overload, we do our best to overperform that we might be appreciated, that we might be recognized, that we might be heard. And yet we walk into even our church buildings and it seems as if we're invisible. There are individuals walk by us and barely even give us eye contact for whatever reason. Oh, it could be because they are distracted by their own concerns. It could be that they were attentive to something else. But for us, it's they didn't even look at me. Or maybe it is that we have done something that we really put our efforts into, and there was no one who said even so much as a thank you for your efforts, much less said, how can I help out? We live in a world of people that want to be seen, but they don't want to be seen for all that they are, but all that they can be. And it leads me to the text, a story that is found in John chapter 9, and it's where I want to focus the majority of our attention tonight, in which Jesus encounters a man along with his disciples at a city, probably at the city gate, or at least in the marketplace, who is trying to make a living by begging for money. And the reason why is the text tells us in John chapter 9 is that he was born blind. He has been blind all of his life, and as such, for him to take so-called gainful employment or to live out a life as one who was sighted, he seems to be limited in all of that. And as Jesus sees him in his plight, Jesus does what he so often does when he sees though in his plight. He spits onto the ground and he picks up the mud and he forms that into his hand and he rubs it onto the eyes of the man, and he says for him to go and wash the mud off. Scholars ask, why would Jesus do such a peculiar thing? There are some that suppose that it was because there was some perception that saliva had medicinal value, but we know Jesus didn't do that. Some said it may have put on the man some responsibility if you really want to see to go and do this thing, but God doesn't require on the works of mankind. It may very well be that it is so dramatic in what Jesus did, it draws the reader's attention to not just the event, but the message it is behind it. The man goes, he washes, he comes back, and he can see. And that is where all the problem begins. Not that he did a good thing, but he did it on a day that the religious leaders of the day held in the highest regard. That was the Sabbath day. They had written volumes upon volumes beyond what God had ever revealed in what we call the Old Law about what it really means to be performing or practicing or keeping the Sabbath. And Jesus did the unthinkable. He did something, even though it was good, on the Sabbath. And as a result of it, Jesus becomes the object of their anger, but they're going to take it out on this blind man. I don't think we should be so shocked by it. And the reason why is as John chapter 9 unfolds, we see any numbers of views of how this blind man was seen. And it certainly represents the way that some see others, and perhaps even how some in this room see those who they come in contact with every day. So if you will, if you've got your Bible or you think you can wrestle your neighbors away from them, go ahead and open to John chapter 9, and let's start where John starts the story. And you'll note that we have the first view of this man, and as he passed by, that's Jesus, he saw a blind man from birth. Notice that John, though he is writing by inspiration, what does he do? He slaps a "hello, my name is blind" on him. We're not told where he's from. We're not given his name. There is no physical description beyond his blindness. We don't know about his hopes. We don't know about his dreams. It'll be some time before we learn anything about his parents. But it is that in that we give him a description based on his external condition, his external appearance. I mean, we talk in terms of they were handsome, she was pretty, he was ugly, they were detestable, they had this, they had that. Or maybe it is that there is some malady, maybe there is some handicap, some disability in which maybe we attach a label by way of partial excuse. In other words, the reason why I can't work with them, the way I can't help them, the way I'm not responsible for them, because simply put, they are and we put it on them. Sometimes it is, we even apply those things to ourselves. We begin to say, well, I'm not smart, or I've been disadvantaged, or if you only knew what happened to me. And as a result of all of those, we scratch out who we are and begin to inscribe on the name tag the label that we put upon ourselves. It's not the label of who this man really is, but it is one of the ways that we look at it. Verse 2, the labels continue. His disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind? This most certainly does draw from an understanding at the time in which one who had a particular physical ailment, that could be traced to either sinful behavior on their part or on their family's part, and therefore they suffer the consequence. Now, there is no doubt that sometimes bad choices, as Sean mentioned this morning, bring consequences. And certainly there are some sinful activities that can lead to some long-reaching effects. But in this particular case, they were misguided in their understanding. And they said, the reason this man is blind, isn't it because he sinned? They slap, as we who are even faithful followers of Jesus often do, is we lay a theological label on them, right? It might be their so-called religious preference, or it might be their religious division or denomination, or maybe it is even within those that we think we are woven into the same theological tapestry in which they are one of these kind of churches or one of those kind of churches, or they're faithful or they're unfaithful or they're fringe or they're part-time or they're a committed Christian or they're not a very committed Christian. They are a fallen away Christian. We have all these kinds of things, even to the point that we begin to argue over all of their circumstances. We might say, well, I don't know if you know this, but she's been married before. Or he used to be an alcoholic, and we begin to lay a theological grid over them as to evaluate if they fall within the parameters of our perceived pattern of what a faithful Christian, failing to see the shadow that reflects off of that grid as it falls upon us. And we respond, but God isn't finished with me. He's still working on me. However, so-and-so, or this person, or that person. And so what we find ourselves is that we again put a kind of label on them, and it's not just about the sign that might hang over the church building where they attend, but it's about their beliefs, and more importantly, the practice of those. And even Jesus' closest say, so this is a product of this man's sin. Tell us more about sin, Jesus, and about the consequences of sin, Jesus. We know how much you hate sin, Jesus. We don't want to be sinners like this guy. I mean, you understand how those conversations might go. I would that it be the end of it there, but we find that those who are around the blind man, they have a view as well. In verse 8, we have the community, those who see this man every single day in their marketplace. Verse 8 says, the neighbors, not very neighborly though, therefore said, who previously saw him as a beggar, were saying, is not this the one who used to sit and beg? Others are saying, this is he. And still others are saying, no, but he is like him. Even though the man's saying, yeah, I'm that guy. I am that guy. I find it interesting that I'm not so sure that this guy was particularly noticeable, meaning he was the only 6'7" Jew of the first century, or that necessarily there was something about his appearance in which he wore gold chains around his neck and they said, hey, you know who that guy is? But it's surprising that this man that they saw every single day, they couldn't clearly identify him. Even after, simply because something had changed, namely his ability to see, and now all of a sudden they're saying, well, I only remember this about him. He was blind and this guy isn't. And they, well, didn't he have red hair? I don't know. He was blind and this one isn't. Yeah, but he was really short. Do you remember it? I don't remember that, but he was blind. In other words, they have jumped into this whole idea of the labeling on the outward appearance, right? And so he becomes a bit of a social issue, and we are good at social issue labels, right? We have those that are homeless, those who are impoverished. Maybe it is those who are wealthy, those who are of some regard. We might designate them by way of their political party, or we might by some economic standard or statute, or the car they drive, or the neighborhood that they live in. Anything that says this is how our society evaluates people. It's how society gives value to persons. is based on this random list of, today in this century, this is how we feel people should be. And maybe it is that it is in some cases a goal that we aspire to, maybe even with great greed, or maybe it is a way in which we can stand upon them to accomplish something by stepping on their backs. I'll leave that to you to decide. But that's expected, right? The people that don't know this man, you would expect him to be one of those that maybe everybody didn't fully know, didn't fully see, didn't fully understand. But it is that the Pharisees decide, you know what, we're going to go to the root of the problem. We're going to go to those who were the parents of this young man. And so they drag them in and they're going to grill them a while. They haven't been able to get from the blind man exactly what they want. They said, what happened? And he goes, I met a man. I was blind, touched my eyes, I could see. And they said, yeah, but give us the details. And he goes, I was blind. I met this man. He put mud on my eyes. I can see. And they go, yeah, but by how? And he goes, I was blind and I met this guy and now I can see. And beyond that, I don't much. And they're just angry because that's not the question they want. And actually, it's not the person they want to question. They're mad that Jesus did this thing on a Sabbath. It's not even the, this is great. How did this happen? Oh, praise God for his workings. Or, where is this man? I have a daughter that's sick. Where is this man? I have a mother who is on her deathbed. Who is this man? We want to hear more about what he... No, it's this. What exactly happened to you? As if being healed was something detestable or repulsive. So what they do is they draw the parents in. You know, parents, believe it or not, always take the guilt of their children, whether their children acted the way their parents wanted them to act. You've been there, right? You've seen some young lady, perhaps, that isn't as covered in a public place as she should be. Or some young man who in his immature impotence is just kind of going, and they go, I bet their mother is real proud of them. Or what kind of home do you think would produce such a child? Or, you know what? We need to call their parents in and get them to fix the thing that we think needs to be fixed. So they call the parents in. And so anyway, they say in verse 20, I got them flip-flopped. We'll come back to it. If you'll jump up 2 slides for me there. His parents answered and said, we know that this is our son. Not very indicting there, right? And that he was born blind. That's the facts. But how he sees, we do not know, or who opened his eyes, we do not know. Why don't you ask him? He's of age. Now, as a parent, even when my children make foolish decisions, even today, I want to rescue them. And that though I may be disappointed when things happen, either of their making or not, that causes them problems, I hurt with them and I want to help them. But when they have something great to share, like, hey, do you remember how the car that I had that was falling apart? I said, yeah, I wish we could have done something. He goes, I got a new car. And I go, I don't want to hear about that. Right? We have no indication here of a family that says, we're excited about this. In fact, they boil him down to merely his genealogy. Yes, he's my son. Yes, he was born blind. The rest, I don't know. He's his own man. I mean, probably they had some financial responsibility for this man because he was without sight. But it seems as if that they simply said, listen, you don't understand how it is with me and my kids, or my mom, or my dad, or my wife, or my children. We slap all those labels on them as if everybody is purely the single relationship that we're talking about. Well, needless to say, this causes these Pharisees some problems. So if you'll back 1 slide up for me, in verse 16, Here's the label they have for him. Therefore, some of the Pharisees were saying, this man is not from God, speaking of Jesus, because he does not keep the Sabbath. And then others, and rightly so, were saying, but how can a man who is a sinner perform such a signs? And there was a division amongst us. And so in this, we find that he becomes a problem or an issue, right? I've seen this play out even in church settings in which an individual, maybe a family, comes to a particular congregation and they may have with them some baggage. Believe it or not, some people have a past. And some of that past is good. And sometimes, if not most of the time, some of that past is bad. And we're going to have a meeting about this. We're going to have a discussion about this. Shepherds, could I meet with you? We need to talk about this. And all of a sudden, the man is going to be boiled down to what they perceive to be a problem. Notice their problem is with Jesus, but they're going to slap a label on this man, right? He is the problem that he causes. That is so contrary to the way that he should be seen, or she should be seen, but we do it nonetheless. In fact, listen to what the Pharisees say as their thoughts about this. In verse 34, they brought him back in, they grill him again. He goes, for the 1,000th time, I'm him. I was blind. I can see. I don't know how. Would you like me to tell it again? And then he says something to him. He says, oh, are you interested in being a follower of his as well? Oh, not a good response, right? Write a letter, but don't say it face to face. And they burst out in verse 34, and they answered and said to him, you were born entirely in sin, and you are teaching us. And they put him out. That it would have been not out of their presence, but out of the synagogue. They made a separation between him and God. And sometimes the label just simply says, you're worldly. You're worthless. You have nothing to offer. You shouldn't even be here. And sometimes we begin to believe that very thing. Here's what Jesus says about the man. And I saved it, though Jesus says it right off the bat. Jesus answers in verse 3, and he says, it was neither this man who sinned or his parents, but it was in order that the works of God might be displayed in him. Jesus changes the way that we see others. When we look at people, we no longer see them from their outward appearance, from their economic status, even from our family relationship or those who are our friends. We say, in this person, God will work to bring glory to himself. It may be that that's something that's in the future, that God is not yet working in that way with them yet, or they're not allowing themselves to be worked. But that's still what Jesus sees. My child who has wandered off, who I have been waiting and working towards reclaiming. Or maybe it is that in the process, they're coming along. That it's not where we think they should be, but it's where God has them today. Or maybe it is somebody that is very close, but because of our tendencies, because of our habit, we look at them the way we always look at everybody. There's a turn at the very end of the play, The Man of La Mancha, and I think it serves as a better lesson for all of us. As the play comes to its conclusion, Alonso Quijana is now in his very last days, the last breaths within him. Aldonza, Dulcinea as he called her, has been pushed away. Finally, she forces herself into the small room where the niece of Quijana as well as the priest are waiting to be with him for his last moments. And she crowds in, much to the chagrin of everyone who's there, and she tries to rekindle this so-called impossible dream, but Kiana's mind is all but gone. He says, I'm sorry, perhaps I knew you in another world or in another life. And she says, no, you must remember. It's about the quest. It's about this dream. And he begins to see a little bit of this. And he goes, the dream, the quest. Tell me more about this quest. And in review, she sings or says the words to the impossible dream. And it drives Kiana to his feet. Frail and empty-faced, he makes his way and he says, of course, I know who I am. I know who you are. He calls for his sidekick Sancho and he says, get my armor and my sword. We're ready to go again. And Sancho says, oh, more misadventures. And he goes, misadventures are at hand, my friend. And then joins the two of them in singing. And at the end, before the song is over, he falls to his knees and onto the bed and he dies. And there is a sadness. And Sancho, seeking to comfort Aldonza, he says, come. He's gone. Our master is dead. Let us go. And she says, my name is not Aldonza. My name is Dulcinea. When we begin to see the way that Jesus sees, then we not only see people different, we see ourselves different. We see ourselves as a child of God, who perhaps in the midst of our bad choices, God is having to work overtime to get us to where we need to be. Or maybe it is that we are beginning to see change, but it doesn't happen fast enough or fast enough for ourselves or for our neighbors. And God said, be patient. I'm bringing you to where I need to be. Or maybe it is we're like, I am lost in the dark and I can't see anything. And God said, that's why you need me. Because I see you not the way you are, but that the way you were always intended to be. The way I created you, the way you were born, the way I sacrificed my son for you to be, that you will be something that will bring glory to God. And that's every person in this room and every person that we encounter. That's who we are. Those image bearers, though at times tarnished, but designed and built, created, preserved, rescued, provided for, saved, to be image bearers of God again. I don't know about you. There's a guy who was 4'11" his junior year of high school. I would love to have known what the man in the mirror looked like. I just couldn't see him. That means something. From a guy that knows deep down inside my frailties, my faults, my mistakes, my choices, my thoughts, to get caught up in what I'm not instead of whose I am. That's the message that Jesus, I believe, shows us, that the works of God might be revealed in you, and you, and you, and yes, even me. A great plate of transformation is one decides to become malleable to God's way, to surrender their life, that we might take off the old man and put on the new man of Jesus Christ. We make nothing light out of baptism, recognizing that it is at that place that we put off and take on. We are washed of our sins and now to live to his glory. And so we make that appeal regularly. But we also appeal to those who have put on new clothes and then mussed them up again, that God might restore us. Or maybe it is that simply we say, God, I know you're working, and I know that I don't always see it. But don't let me keep you from shaping me to be who I'm supposed to be. He gives us opportunities like this where we can encourage, we can pray for, we can share with you no matter where you are. And if tonight you feel that you need to say, I want to be seen, Let me tell you, you are seen. You're seen by the God of all, the one who created, the one who made you. And if we, by our actions, can remind you of that in any way, just let us know by coming forward as we stand.